You ever notice how some people don't even need to say a word to tell you what they think of you? One look, one smirk, and you already know you're not worth their time. That's pretty much how my morning started on the base. Boots hitting the concrete, cold air biting my face, and a line of young soldiers half my age eyeing me like I was some washed-up relic that never left the desert. Maybe they weren't wrong. I mean, I still smelled like oil and grease most days, carried myself more like a mechanic than a soldier. But what they didn't know, what none of them cared to find out, was that I had once kept a whole unit alive out in Afghanistan with nothing but duct tape, busted wrenches, and a prayer. Instead, what they saw was a guy named Ethan Cole, 40, scruffy beard, coveralls that never quite came clean no matter how many times I ran them through the wash. The Army had been my whole world once, until a disciplinary note followed me around like a curse. Nobody cared that I took the fall for someone else. They just saw the black mark on my record and figured I was trouble. So now my world had shrunk down to this: fixing vehicles in a drafty old motor pool at the edge of the naval base. Half forgotten by everyone except when something broke down, bad enough no one else wanted to touch it. And oh, the way they looked at me. Some of those lieutenants strutted in with their pressed uniforms and polished shoes, tossing me keys like I was some gas station attendant. "Hey, grease monkey, think you can handle this before lunch?" They'd laugh, slap each other on the back, and walk out before I could answer. I didn't fight it anymore. I'd just nod, keep my head down, and let their laughter echo off the metal walls. But inside I was grinding my teeth so hard I thought I'd chip enamel. That morning was colder than usual. My breath came out in clouds as I rolled up the bay door, the smell of diesel hanging in the air. I was already elbow deep in a Humvee's busted transmission when I heard the commotion outside. A group of soldiers were circling around a Jeep Wrangler, its hood smoking like a chimney. The driver, a young woman in uniform, was standing there looking lost. You could tell right away she was new, boots still too shiny, rank freshly stitched. Captain Sarah Miller, that's what her tag said. She was trying to explain the problem, but the guys weren't listening. They were too busy cracking jokes. "Maybe you should try turning it on and off again, Captain. Or maybe it just doesn't like being driven by a woman." Their laughter was sharp, cruel, the kind that makes you want to spit. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped outside. Sarah's face was red, not from the cold, but from humiliation. You could see the way she was gripping her clipboard tighter, trying to stay professional while the shark circled. That's when one of the sergeants spotted me. He smirked and shouted loud enough for the whole yard to hear. "Hey, why don't we let Cole have a crack at it? Man's got nothing better to do than bang on junk all day." More laughter. Heads turned toward me, waiting to see if I'd snap, maybe beg for their respect. But I just met his eyes, gave the faintest shrug, and walked straight toward the Jeep. Sarah looked at me, a mix of embarrassment and desperation in her eyes. "Sir, I'm sorry about all this. I just need the vehicle running. I've got a convoy inspection in 48 hours, and if this doesn't pass..." Her voice trailed off, but I didn't need her to finish. I'd seen that look 100 times before. A career could be broken by something as simple as a dead engine. I leaned over the hood, listened to the weak cough of the starter, the metallic grind in the gears. "It's not pretty," I said finally, "but it's not dead yet." She blinked at me, maybe expecting me to laugh like the others. Instead, I added, "Leave it with me. I'll get her running." Behind me, I could hear the whispers. "Yeah, right, old man. He'll probably make it worse." I tuned it out. Let them laugh. Let them bet against me. I'd been underestimated before. Hell, my whole damn life was built on people underestimating me. Sarah hesitated, then handed me the keys. Our eyes met for a second longer than normal, and in that glance there was something, respect, maybe even hope. She whispered, almost like she didn't want anyone else to hear, "Thank you." I watched her walk away, back stiff, chin high, trying to shake off the sting of the humiliation she'd just taken. The crowd dispersed too, still chuckling under their breath. And me? I stood there with the keys in my palm, grease on my hands, and a fire in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. You see, I'd gotten used to being invisible, to being the guy they mocked and then forgot about 5 minutes later. But that day, something in me shifted. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, like I was her last shot. Maybe it was the memory of all those nights overseas, when a broken axle meant the difference between life and death. Or maybe, deep down, I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't finished yet. I turned back toward the garage, closed the bay door behind me, and muttered under my breath, "All right, old man, time to show 'em what you've still got." I swear, there's something about an empty motor pool at night that gets under your skin. The echo of a dropped wrench, the hum of a single fluorescent bulb that flickers like it's about to give up, the cold concrete creeping into your knees. That's where I was. Me, a Jeep that barely had a pulse left, and a whole crowd of doubters waiting for me to fail. Most guys would have tossed in the towel and told Captain Miller to pray for a replacement vehicle. But me? I'd been in worse situations. Hell, I'd once patched a Humvee axle with parts stripped off an abandoned Soviet truck while RPGs were flying overhead. Compared to that, a Jeep in a quiet garage was child's play. I pulled the hood open and immediately knew I was in for a long night. The radiator was coughing out steam like an old smoker, hoses cracked, the transmission whining with every shift. Parts were worn to the bone, and I knew half of what I needed wasn't in stock. The supply sergeant hated my guts, so asking him for spares would just give him an excuse to laugh in my face. So I did what I always did, made do with whatever scraps I had lying around. The pile in the corner looked like junk to most people. Old belts, busted clamps, bolts rusted from years of neglect. But I'd learned long ago that every broken part had at least one more trick in it. You just had to know how to coax it back to life. I sorted through the mess, my fingers black with grease, mind racing through old battlefield repairs. I could almost hear the voices of my squad from back in Kandahar. "Cole, if you don't get this thing running, we're stuck out here for good." Those weren't just words, they were life and death. And you don't forget that kind of pressure. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps. Thought it was one of the clowns coming back to get another laugh at my expense. But when I looked up, it was Captain Miller, standing by the doorway, arms crossed, still in uniform. She looked exhausted but steady. "You're still at it?" she asked, her voice softer than before. I shrugged. These things don't fix themselves. She stepped in, the sound of her boots echoing against the walls. For a second, I thought she might try to help, but she just watched. You could tell she was wrestling with something, probably wondering why the hell this half-disgraced grease monkey was giving her more effort than her own team. "You know," she said finally, "they all think you're wasting your time." I didn't even look up. Wouldn't be the first time someone thought that about me. She didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes like the others. She just stood there, maybe seeing something in the way I moved. Careful, precise, not wasting an ounce of energy. After a moment, she asked, "Why do you keep doing it? Taking jobs like this, I mean. You don't owe me anything." That one stung more than I thought it would. I tightened a bolt a little harder than necessary, then set the wrench down and wiped my hands on a rag. Because once, somebody gave me a shot when I didn't deserve it. Kept me alive long enough to prove I wasn't just dead weight. Guess I'm just paying it forward. She didn't say anything after that, just nodded once, like she understood, and left me to the silence. The hours dragged on, and every step felt like fighting uphill. I rigged a bypass with a piece of copper wire stripped from an old generator. I swapped out a busted hose with one I cut down from a junked de-icer line. Each fix was ugly, not regulation approved, but solid enough to get that Jeep back on the road. My hands were shaking from the cold and the effort, but I kept at it. The whole time I pictured those smirks from earlier, the way they looked at me like I was nothing. That was my fuel. You want to laugh at me? Fine. But you're damn well going to choke on that laugh when this thing roars back to life. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I slumped against the wall, staring at the Jeep. My body was screaming, but I wasn't done yet. I thought back to that night convoy in Helmand. Engine shot, ammo running low, enemy closing in. Everyone thought we were finished, but I crawled under that burning vehicle, skin blistering from the heat, and found a way to get her running. We rolled out just as mortars started raining down. They called it a miracle. I called it doing my job. Tonight felt the same. Nobody was shooting at me, but the stakes were still high. Maybe not for me, but for that young captain who didn't deserve to get crushed because her vehicle failed inspection. By dawn, the motor pool was cold and quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. My hands were torn up, black with oil, but when I turned the key and heard that engine cough, sputter, then settle into a steady growl, it was like music. No one was there to hear it, no applause, no cheering. Just me and that sound filling the garage. I leaned back, exhaled, and muttered, "Still got it, old man." That's the thing people don't get. Strength doesn't always come with medals or applause. Sometimes it's just you, alone in the dark, fighting a battle nobody even knows you're fighting, and winning, even if nobody cares. But deep down, I knew somebody did care. Sarah Miller saw me, and for the first time in a long while, that was enough to keep me going. By the time morning formation rolled around, I looked like hell. Grease streaked across my arms, shirt soaked in sweat even though it was cold out. My hands shook from too much coffee and not enough sleep. But that Jeep, she was purring like a cat. I had her parked right in the middle of the yard, hood down, looking like nothing had ever been wrong. Of course, the peanut gallery showed up early. A couple of young lieutenants with fresh fades and cocky grins, leaning against the fence like they were at a ball game. I could already hear the whispers. "Bet Cole patched it with duct tape again. Watch it fall apart the second she turns the key." Their smirks made my jaw tighten, but I kept my mouth shut. That's the thing I'd learned. You don't win a fight by barking louder. You win by letting the results speak for you. Captain Miller arrived a little later, clipboard in hand, face calm but her eyes giving her away. She was nervous, like she had her whole career riding on that Jeep. Truth is, she probably did. In the Army, image is everything, and showing up with a busted ride in front of command isn't the kind of image you want attached to your name. The inspection officer, a colonel with a chest full of ribbons, walked up, gave the Jeep one glance, and raised an eyebrow. "This the one that was dead yesterday?" His voice carried, and suddenly the yard was silent. You could feel everyone waiting for the punchline. I wiped my hands on my rag, stepped aside, and said, "Yes, sir. All set now." The colonel looked at me, then at Miller, then back at the Jeep. "Start it." She slid behind the wheel, gave me one quick look, half question, half prayer, and turned the key. For a heartbeat, nothing. I felt my stomach twist. Then with a cough and a growl, the engine roared to life. Not sputtering, not gasping, solid, steady, strong. The sound echoed across the yard like a damn anthem. The colonel nodded, almost impressed, then walked off with his clipboard. But the real show wasn't him. It was the faces of the guys who'd been laughing at me less than 24 hours ago. Mouths open, smirks gone, eyes darting between me and that Jeep like they'd just seen a ghost. One of them actually muttered, "No way," under his breath. And that's when Miller stood up. She didn't just thank me quietly. No. She turned to the whole damn group and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Do you people even know who you're laughing at?" The yard froze. Even I was caught off guard. My first instinct was to shut her down, but she kept going, voice sharp, steady, like she'd been holding this in for a while. "That man right there, Ethan Cole, he's not some washed-up mechanic. He's the reason an entire platoon made it out of Helmand alive. He was lead tech on the 3rd Armored Convoy Unit. While you were still in high school, he was out there under fire, keeping vehicles running with nothing but scrap parts and grit. And if you'd bother reading a little history, you'd know that." You could have heard a pin drop. The young sergeant who'd called me junkyard dog yesterday suddenly found his boots real interesting. Another guy tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked, and it just made the silence heavier. I wanted to crawl into the ground. Not because I was ashamed, but because I'd spent years trying to bury that part of me. See, the Army doesn't hand out second chances easy. That disciplinary mark on my record, they never knew I'd taken the blame to protect a captain who screwed up an op plan. If the truth had come out, he'd have lost everything. So I kept my mouth shut, carried the black mark, and lived with everyone thinking I was reckless. But now here was Miller, throwing it all out in the open. I didn't ask her to. I never even told her the whole story. Somehow she dug into my file, maybe talked to someone who'd been there. And now the truth was hanging in the air like a live grenade. The colonel stopped mid-step and turned back, studying me with fresh eyes. I didn't move, didn't say a word. Just let the silence burn. Finally, one of the cocky lieutenants muttered, I, I didn't know. His voice was small, like a kid caught lying. I looked at him then, really looked, and said, yeah, that's the point. You never bothered to know. For once, nobody laughed. Nobody smirked. The air was thick with shame, like the whole yard had been slapped across the face. And I'll be honest, damn, it felt good. Not because I wanted them humiliated, but because I wanted them to finally see. To see that the guy they treated like dirt still had value, still had fight. Miller walked over, handed me the keys, and said in front of everyone, thank you, Sergeant Cole. You saved me. You saved all of us. Her voice cracked just enough to make it real. And right then, standing in that freezing motor pool with grease still drying on my hands, I felt something I hadn't in years. Pride. Not the kind that comes with medals or rank. The kind that comes when the truth finally punches through all the lies, when people who spat on your name have no choice but to swallow it. Later, as the crowd drifted off, I caught a few soldiers sneaking glances at me. Not with contempt this time, but with respect. Some even with guilt. The same guys who called me useless yesterday were now whispering my name like it meant something again. And me? I just leaned against that Jeep, arms crossed, pretending like it didn't matter. But inside, I'll admit it, I was smiling. Because sometimes the sweetest victory isn't yelling back or throwing a punch. It's just standing there while the truth does the work for you. You know that feeling when a storm finally breaks, and for a few seconds the whole world just goes quiet? That's what the motor pool felt like after the Jeep roared to life and the truth hit the yard. The jokes stopped. The smirks died. All that was left was this heavy silence, the kind that makes a man think about the last dumb thing he said. I could see it on their faces, embarrassment, shame, maybe even regret, but I didn't let myself enjoy it too much. Respect in the Army is a funny thing. It can turn on a dime, but it can vanish just as fast if you cling to it like a trophy. Later that afternoon, I was back in the shop wiping down my tools when I heard boots at the door. It was that young sergeant, the same one who'd called me a junkyard dog. He looked like a kid who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He shuffled his feet, cleared his throat, and finally muttered, hey, about yesterday, I was out of line. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. I didn't say much, just nodded and kept wiping the wrench in my hand. After a long pause, I told him, you weren't out of line. You were just wrong. Don't confuse the two. He flinched a little at that, but I wasn't trying to humiliate him. I just wanted him to understand there's a difference between being sharp and being cruel. He gave a stiff nod and left. Small step, but I could tell it shook him. What I didn't expect was the visit from the colonel himself. Big chest, ribbons shining. The kind of guy who usually wouldn't waste a second on someone like me. He stepped into the bay, looked around at the mess, then fixed his eyes on me. Sergeant Cole, he said, you've been underutilized here. Underutilized, hell of a fancy word for forgotten. He went on, I want you to take point on a new program. Teach these younger mechanics how to keep vehicles alive under pressure. We need them learning from someone who's seen the worst. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to laugh. Me leading a program when yesterday I was barely more than a punchline? But another part of me, the part that still remembered patching Humvees in the desert with rounds whizzing overhead, knew this was my shot. I swallowed hard, nodded, and said, yes, sir. That night, Miller stopped by the shop again. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me clean up. There was no audience this time, no crowd, just the two of us. You handled today better than I would have, she admitted. Most people would have rubbed their faces in it. I smirked, tossed a rag on the bench. Trust me, I thought about it. But here's the thing. I don't need them crawling back. I just need them to do better next time. That's payback enough. She smiled at that, but it wasn't just amusement. It was respect. And I'll tell you, respect from someone who's earned their stripes the hard way? That meant more than any apology I could get from the rest. Over the next few days, something shifted. The same soldiers who'd avoided me like the plague were now drifting into the shop with excuses. Hey, Cole, mind showing me that trick with the starter? Or, how'd you know it was the transmission and not the clutch? They didn't say sorry outright, but their curiosity was its own kind of apology. And me, I started teaching, not with lectures or manuals, but with stories. Back in Kandahar, we had a Humvee with half a transmission missing. Here's how we got it rolling. Their eyes would go wide, not because I was bragging, but because they'd never heard it that way before. Not from a book, but from someone who'd lived it. One evening, while showing a couple of privates how to rewire a corroded harness, I caught myself laughing, actually laughing. It had been years since I felt that. I realized I wasn't just fixing engines anymore. I was fixing something in myself. The shame I'd carried, the anger at being overlooked, it all started to lift. Of course, not everyone changed overnight. There were still a few who kept their distance, maybe too proud to admit they'd been wrong. But even they stopped running their mouths, and that, in its own way, was victory enough. I'll never forget what Miller said to me one late night as we locked up. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You've been carrying that disciplinary mark like a weight around your neck. But out here, none of that matters anymore. What matters is what you do with the second chance staring you in the face." That hit me hard, because for years I'd been living like my story was over, like the Army had stamped me as a screw-up, and that was the end of it. But maybe she was right. Maybe the story wasn't over. It was just being rewritten. And so, little by little, I started seeing myself differently too. Not as the guy they whispered about, but as a man who still had something to give. A man who could turn a dusty garage into a classroom, a broken Jeep into a lesson, and maybe, just maybe, a bunch of cocky young soldiers into better men than I'd ever been allowed to be. There's something about the end of the day on base that gets to you. The sun starts dipping behind the hangars. The flags catch that last bit of orange glow, and the world feels quieter than it should. That's when I usually closed up the shop, locking the toolbox and brushing off the dust. But lately I'd find myself standing in the doorway a little longer, watching the younger soldiers file past with their jokes in their backpacks, some giving me nods now instead of side eyes. Funny thing, respect doesn't make a sound when it changes hands, but you can feel it just the same. It had been a few weeks since the Jeep incident, and things weren't the same anymore. The colonel had put me in charge of a small training program. Nothing fancy, just a group of green mechanics and motor pool kids, sitting cross-legged on the concrete while I tore down an old carburetor and told them stories they'd never read in a manual. They ate it up. Not because I was some great teacher, but because it was real. They could tell I wasn't polishing anything. When I said, "If you don't triple-check this bolt, someone doesn't make it home," they knew I wasn't exaggerating. One of the privates, a kid from Oklahoma with dirt still on his boots, stayed late one night. He lingered while the others left, then finally asked me, "Sergeant Cole, were you scared out there? I mean, in Afghanistan, when it all went bad?" I didn't answer right away. I thought back to the dust storms, the explosions, the nights when I wasn't sure the sun would rise again. I looked at him and said, "Yeah, scared damn near every day. But fear isn't the problem, son. It's letting fear stop you that'll get you killed. You keep moving, keep fixing, keep fighting, because somebody else is counting on you to do it. That's how you get through." His eyes got wide, and I realized right then that maybe that's what I was supposed to be doing all along. Not just fixing busted engines, but fixing the way these kids thought about themselves, about what it means to stand up when it's easier to fold. Miller came by often, too. Sometimes she'd bring coffee, sometimes just stand by the doorway, like she had that first night. We didn't talk much about that inspection day anymore, but every once in a while, she'd say something like, "You know, Cole, you saved more than a Jeep that morning." And I'd just nod because she was right. It wasn't just her career on the line. It was me proving to myself that I still had a place here. What I didn't expect was how far the story traveled. Word got around. Other units started sending guys over, asking if they could sit in on the sessions. One day the colonel himself stopped by again, stood in the back and listened while I explained how to jury-rig a cooling system with spare canteen tubing. When I finished, he pulled me aside and said, "You've done more for morale around here than half the speeches I've given. Don't underestimate that." Coming from him, that hit hard. And yet, late at night when the shop was quiet, I'd still feel the weight of that old disciplinary mark, the part of me that had been written off, the years lost in the shadows. Some scars don't fade, not even when the crowd finally claps for you. But then I'd remember something my old platoon sergeant used to say. You don't get to choose the scars, son, but you do get to choose what story they tell. Maybe that was the whole point. One Friday evening, as the sun set and the motor pool lights buzzed to life, Miller and I walked across the yard. She glanced at me and said, "You ever think about what's next? After all this?" I chuckled, shoved my hands in my pockets. Nah, I've wasted too much time worrying about what's next. Right now, I'm just focused on making sure these kids don't make the same mistakes I did. She nodded, then said something that stuck with me. That's how legacies are built, not by medals or titles, but by the lives you shape. And she was right, because the truth is, I'm not going to be around forever. But those kids, they'll take the lessons, the grit, the stubbornness I drilled into them, and they'll carry it forward. And that's more valuable than any shiny plaque on a wall. So here's what I learned, and maybe what I want anyone listening to remember. Life will write you off if you let it. People will laugh, underestimate you, slap labels on your back you never asked for. But none of that decides your worth. What decides it is what you do when no one's watching, when the garage is empty, and it's just you and a broken machine, and a choice. Quit or keep fighting. Me? I kept fighting. And somewhere along the way, I found out I wasn't just fixing engines. I was fixing myself. So yeah, maybe I'll always be the grease monkey to some. But to the ones who matter, I became something else. A reminder that no matter how many times you get knocked down, you can stand back up, wipe the dirt off your hands, and get to work. Because in the end, it's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Life has a way of testing us in the quietest, harshest ways. Not always through grand battles, but through the small humiliations, the unfair labels, the whispered doubts that eat at our worth. Ethan's story is a reminder that even when the world underestimates you, your value doesn't disappear. True strength isn't measured by medals or applause, but by the grit to keep going when no one believes in you, by the dignity of holding your head high in the face of mockery, and by the choice to respond with resilience instead of bitterness. In a culture where it's easy to stay silent, to swallow the injustice and let it define you, he showed us another way. Let your actions speak louder than the noise. Let the work of your hands and the integrity of your heart rewrite the story others tried to write for you. As the old saying goes, you can't keep a good man down. Respect, fairness, and dignity may not come quickly, but when they do, they arrive with a power that changes not only how others see you, but how you see yourself. So maybe the lesson here is simple. Don't let the world decide your worth. Break free from the toxic voices, face the injustice with quiet resolve, and trust that time will reveal the truth. What you build in silence, what you endure with patience, can one day inspire others who are fighting their own hidden battles. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to prove yourself against the odds? Hit like if you believe in second chances, and subscribe for more stories that dig deep into the heart of resilience and justice. Wishing you peace tonight and the quiet hope that after every storm, the road ahead can be brighter than you ever imagined.